Seneca was a Roman philosopher, a Stoic, who wrote a book called On Anger. And in it, he compares anger to the forces of nature, such as fierce winds and storms, or to knives and swords that threaten to cut up and dismember the self. As he puts it, anger tramples self-restraint underfoot, steeps its hands in slaughter, scatters abroad the limbs of its children. We may think that we own our anger, that anger is something that we can manage, but he believes that anger quickly comes to own us. It's like playing with a candle in a room filled with gasoline. It can quickly catch and burn out of control. We sometimes think that emotions are things that we have, that we are rational beings who experience anger or happiness or joy, and that there is a self that stands apart from those experiences. And in a way, that is true. Usually, I can restrain myself even when I feel intense anger rather than lash out, which shows that there is a part of myself that is apart from the anger that I'm feeling. But there is also a very real way in which emotions come to shape and reshape us. Experiencing anger, bitterness, and resentment repeatedly, constantly can change us. This has been borne out in science, which shows that anger can rewire neural pathways, and in so doing, make us angry people. Not just people who experience anger, but angry people. And so I've been thinking a lot about this these last couple of weeks because my emotions have been persistent, intense, and sometimes troubling. I have felt my share of anger and resentment. I have felt dismay and bitterness. And then there's something else too, something that I worry over, something that isn't polite or nice. It's contempt. I have been feeling contempt. And what I have felt as trans people are targeted and victimized, as immigrants are terrorized by ICE, as funding is pulled from the poor and the hungry, is contempt towards the perpetrators. And I have really tried to plumb its depths, to turn it from every angle, to look at it so that I can understand it and have knowledge of it and why it is a part of me and why I feel it so intensely right now. And what I have gleaned from introspection, from this personal investigation, is that it's not a hot feeling. It's not a feeling that sits close to anger. It's not a feeling that stems from a trauma or a wound where I feel wound up and triggered and ready to melt down or lash out. Instead, it's a colder, flatter thing. It's a kind of contempt where I would be glad to stand back and watch something horrible befall the perpetrators. And it wouldn't even be joy or smugness over the injury, just a calm acceptance and knowledge that they deserved it, one where I didn't flinch from their suffering. That's it. I wouldn't be bothered by their suffering. I told you, it wasn't nice. It's not pretty. It's probably something I shouldn't admit to because it's the kind of emotion that makes you wonder what kind of person I am for feeling it. But what I have also come to know to be true is that the only way that we can grapple with a feeling or experience is when, is when we are honest about it. And if we refuse to be honest about it, then we let those painful and difficult emotions fester. And so I'm going to continue being honest, even when being honest is hard and sometimes ugly. And then here's the caveat. Getting honest about contempt shouldn't mean that we get comfortable with it. Getting honest is a step, but it's only a first step. You see, if we stay there, if we stay with our problematic feelings but do nothing to move past them, then I worry about Seneca's advice. Our hatred or contempt or bitterness or resentment might, in the end, change us and reshape us in its image. It will not be a question of sometimes feeling contempt or hatred. Rather, if we let that feeling fester, it will turn us into contemptuous and hateful people. And I desperately don't want that. Desperately. I don't want to be a hateful person. It's not only against what I value, I think it's a poisoned and broken way of being in the world. And so I am looking for other possibilities, other ways of viewing my political opponents that don't deaden my heart. And what has been coming to mind is the story of the Good Samaritan, the one that Will read this morning. And what we find in this story is that a man is beaten and broken on the side of the road, and a priest and a Levite walk past, and neither bother to help the man. But then the Samaritan walks past, and he is the one who chooses to assist. He not only cares for the man by bandaging his wounds, but takes him to an inn and then pays for his care. He goes above and beyond what could have been expected from any passing stranger. Now, over the centuries, this story has lost some of its force. And this is because most of us have little concept of how the Samaritans and the Israelites viewed each other, what sorts of relations they had. When Israel reformed after the exile, the Samaritans made a political pact with Persia and then undermined the Israelites' attempt to rebuild Israel and the temple in Jerusalem. So the Samaritans were considered traitors who valued their personal enrichment and comfort over the well-being of their nation. It wasn't that they just had different customs and interpretations of Judaism. The Samaritans were considered threats, enemies, a group of people who wouldn't mind if the Israelites got destroyed. If I were an evangelical pastor, and I wanted to be faithful to the parable of the Good Samaritan, I would retell it with an evangelical on the side of the road. And then the person who would come by and rescue him or her would be a trans person, or an undocumented immigrant, or a Democrat, or an atheist. And then when Jesus asks who was this person's neighbor, the congregation would have to answer that it was the trans person, or the undocumented immigrant, or the Democrat, or the atheist. And that would be a hard lesson, perhaps an offensive lesson, but it would be a lesson that would be genuine to the Gospels. Here's the thing. Here's where it gets hard. We don't get to tell the story that way. The parable loses its force when you identify with the Samaritan. Indeed, if you feel good after hearing the parable, then you probably got it wrong. Instead, the lesson has to be hard. It has to be offensive. It has to be about someone who threatens your safety and values and worldview. And so here's where we would have to go as theological and or political progressives. The person in the gutter, would have to be a Democrat or a liberal or Unitarian Universalist. And the Samaritan would have to wear a Make America Great Again hat. Maybe the Samaritan would have to be Elon Musk. Maybe the Samaritan would have to be the president himself. And when I tell the parable in that way, when I really think through it, it simply makes no sense to me. The MAGA movement makes no secret of its glee in owning the libs, and it often spouts rhetoric about its enemies and its wishes to do away with them and its wishes to harm them. As Trump put it recently, we have an outside enemy, and then we have an enemy within. And the enemy within, in my opinion, is more dangerous than Russia, China, and all the other countries. And then this doesn't even touch the abhorrent anti-trans, anti-immigrant, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric that comes from parts of the MAGA movement. And so I struggle. I struggle mightily to apply this parable, to think that it makes a shred of sense. If I were on the side of the road wearing a Pride t-shirt or a Kamala for President t-shirt or a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, of course someone with a MAGA hat would walk right past me. They wouldn't give me a second look. I have to think that the parable is some kind of joke, that it's naive or stupid, that it no longer applies in this day and age. But if I think that, then I have misunderstood the intention of the parable, because that's exactly it. That feeling of bewilderment, of disbelief, that is exactly what the parable would have done to the people listening in first century Palestine. They would have said, of course the Samaritan is not a good neighbor. Of course the Samaritan would have walked past. The people would have left Jesus' sermon scratching their heads, or maybe they would have left it pissed. I don't know, but it wouldn't have made sense. And it still doesn't. It doesn't make sense to me, not when I apply it to the people that I feel that cold, flat contempt towards. And that, I think, is why we need this parable to be retold, and retold again, and then again. Because what it does is it punctures my preconceived notions and opens a terrain of hope and possibility. It is the possibility that any given person on the other side of the political or theological spectrum could at any time triumph over their political views and tribal affiliations and become my neighbor. And then it challenges me. It forces me to wonder what I would do if I would help Elon Musk or Donald Trump or someone wearing a MAGA hat who had been beaten and broken on the side of the road. And if my answer is no, if my answer is that I would turn away, if the answer is that I would just let my contempt get the best of me while they suffer, then the parable looks me square in the eye and asks me if that is the kind of person I wish to be, the person who would walk away, the person who acts out of hatred and contempt rather than something better. And when the parable does that, when it looks me straight in the eye, that cold, flat hatred, that place in my heart that had turned to stone, it starts to crack open. And even though it changes nothing about my political commitments, not a thing, even while it doesn't challenge for a moment my commitment to justice and inclusion and truth-telling, it changes everything about my approach to my political opponents. Because it reminds me that in everyone there is always this radical possibility that we can see past our walls and build bridges, that we can set aside our contempt and do better. Because when I think about it, when I take that honest look at myself, I don't want to be remade in the image of my bitterness, contempt, or hatred. I just don't. I don't want to sit around stoking my rage at the other side and then watch myself become the very thing that I am fighting against. I would rather be shaped in the image of this radical possibility that our bitterest differences can dissolve, and then from that space of hope and goodness seek to reshape the world in a more hopeful, good, and just way. Now, I'm going to forget this. I'm probably going to forget this as these next 4 years unfold. And so what I'll have is the parable. I can reread the parable. I can invite its truth into my heart, warming that coldness, that bitterness, and trust that its words, maybe not today, but one day, won't baffle me and will instead make sense. And Jesus said, "Which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" And the crowd said, "The one who had mercy on him." And then Jesus said, "Go and do likewise."